What makes a movie great? I don't know. Steven Soderbergh said something interesting. A great movie has within it everything you need to know about how to make a movie. I think there's a truth to that. It's like all the ingredients to a great dish are there for you to see. You may never be able to recreate it exactly how it is, but that's what makes it special. And even if Soderbergh wasn't already directly referencing this movie, the quote comes from his commentary track, it would absolutely apply to Carol Reed's masterpiece, The Third Man. Released in 1949, not a long way off from the end of the Second World War, the film is set in a post-apocalyptic Vienna. Once beautiful buildings lay bombed and barren in the streets. The aftermath of the Great War is still very much a part of the city. Poverty is rampant, and so is crime. As our narrator nonchalantly explains in the opening, people are forced to make a living in less than morally upright ways. Dropped into this shady world is our protagonist, Holly Martins, a naive American writer who is here to meet an old friend. He barely makes it to his apartment before learning that Harry Lime died only a day or two earlier.
Sie kommen 10 Minuten zu spät. 10 minutes too late. Already gone. Who? His friends. And coffin. Coffin?
This was supposedly how the whole idea of the film even started. Graham Greene, one of the great British writers of his time, wrote a single sentence years before the film was even conceived. That sentence would become the opening. It took a 2-week trip to Vienna and a lunch meeting with a British intelligence officer for the rest of the story to take shape. The key was learning about the penicillin racket and the underground sewer system, where cops and criminals chased each other like cats and mice. Greene had worked with director Carol Reed on his last film, The Fallen Idol, and the two made for a fruitful collaboration. Together, under the eyes of London film producer Alexandra Korda and American giant David O. Selznick, the roots of an international movie had been planted. None of them knew just how great of a movie they were setting out to make. As is often the case in the movie industry, the studio heads and the directors didn't really get along on a lot of the crucial decisions. Selznick was one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, and at this time he was at his most intense, taking Benzedrine, aka Speed, 6 days a week just so he could stay up later in his office. On the other side of the pond, Reed was up to a similar thing. During the 7-week shoot, he had 3 units operating simultaneously, night and day, and insisted to be at each one whenever they were ready to start filming. To add to the insanity, they were shooting much of the film in Vienna. Now, this wasn't normal for the time. The British and American systems were used to the comfort and control of a studio warehouse, where sets could be designed and manipulated to suit the needs of production. The Third Man was one of the first British films to be shot on location. Reed felt that the authenticity of really being there would add to the film's atmosphere, and had to fight Selznick over it. Eventually, with the support of Korda, he got the green light, managing to capture all the glorious cinematic decay out on display. 70 years later, and you can't picture the movie without it. This idea of using real people and places was very much a product of the war. In Italy, directors like Rossellini, De Sica, and Visconti were paving a new road with neorealism, a mode of filmmaking that embraced the truth and imperfections of the real world. Instead of the heightened glamour audiences were used to seeing in Hollywood pictures, they were seeing poor, hungry, broken faces fight the struggle of everyday life. Many great films came out of this period, and neorealism became a global influence. The American genre that best suited this style was film noir. Movies like The Naked City, Kiss of Death, and Force of Evil used New York as a grimy backdrop for their characters' conflicts. Although most of the interiors of The Third Man were shot in studios in England, Vienna is as prominent as any of the actors on screen. Reed was the best at bringing out the essence of whatever he was shooting. Details like hosing down the streets to make them glitter in the night or adding props in the foreground of a shot make the world feel more alive and lived in. You can feel his style, but it never imposes on the mood of the scene. One of the elements the movie's most known for is its use of tilted angles. Reed and his cinematographer Robert Krasker don't shy away from angling the camera quite a lot. What's interesting to me is that what's normally used as a visual cue for tension and discomfort is here used in both tense and tender moments alike.
No, I don't know. I'm just a hack writer who drinks too much and falls in love with girls. You?
Me?
Don't be such a fool, of course.
If you rang me up and asked me were you fair or dark, I had a mustache, I wouldn't have known.
It's hard to pinpoint what is actually driving the camera's point of view until you let go and let the movie carry you along with it. As liberated as it may be, nothing feels out of place. And nothing could be more inseparable from this movie than its score.
This is the man, Mr. Anton Karas, seen here at London's Empress Club.
On its face, The Third Man may just be, as Green has described it, a comedy thriller. It's got all the twists and turns of a fast-paced mystery, with plenty of interesting side characters and a love story to boot. But it's more than that, and I think the music is a very good example of why. The way this story goes, Reed came across Anton Karas and his zither at a club in Vienna. It was his first time hearing the instrument, and immediately felt it should go into the film. He invited Karas back to his hotel and turned his room into a recording studio for him to play hours of improvisation. Although it was later re-recorded in a professional booth, that's the sound you hear in the movie. It's impossible to describe exactly what tone the music captures. It's playful yet nostalgic, like something you'd hear at a clown's funeral. It embodies the fantasy of Hollywood escapism in a post-war world. That's something the film as a whole manages to express so well. For a piece of mass entertainment, The Third Man does not shy away from the very real corruption and damage felt outside the safety of movie theaters. It embraces the ruin of the city, with its heavy shadows and crumbling walls. The story may be fiction, but it's based in a global reality. Holly Martins is the typical naive American who has his innocence stripped away by the truth. From the very beginning, he's surrounded by people who know more than he does, yet he's always shoving himself into situations that he's not equipped to handle. When he finally does face the facts, he looks tired and broken down. Knowledge is a burden, and it's a burden that the film bestows on its audience. That's what makes it special. Sure, you can watch this movie just for its brilliant storytelling or beautiful black and white, but the deeper you dig, the more it has to offer.
I once said to Orson Welles, my God, that role of Harry Lime, you're so great in that picture. And he said, that's the part. It's the greatest star part ever written. Well, you know what a star part is. He says, that's where they talk about you for an hour and then you appear. He says, I did it on the stage, one called Mr. Wu. Everybody for the first 45 minutes of the play says, but what will happen when Mr. Wu gets here? And yes, but what will Mr. Wu say about this? And wait till we find out what Mr. Wu thinks and all that. And he says, and everybody boils around the stage, as Orson said, for about almost an hour, talking about Mr. Wu. And then just at the end of the first act, way in the distance on the stage, crossing a bridge, comes the small figure of Mr. Wu. And everybody goes, Mr. Wu. And the curtain comes down and the audience comes out and says, isn't that actor playing Mr. Wu great? Orson said, that's a star part for you.
Orson Welles has maybe the most memorable movie entrance of all time, and he doesn't even show up for the first hour. People going to see the film in theaters knew he was in it. How could they not? But he's absent for so long that we almost forget that he is. Then he does appear, and the whole screen lights up. As few and far between as they may be, every scene he's in is electric.
Harry!
Roger Ebert said he looks like a college kid caught playing a naughty prank. That casual smile and those restless eyes tell a whole story in and of themselves. Supposedly, Welles was as hard to find on set as Harry Lime was in the film. The crew would spend days waiting for him to show up, forcing Reed to find other ways of shooting his character. He ended up using doubles for their feet or shadows, which ended up adding to the mystery of the character. His most famous moment, and the moment that sums up his whole persona, comes after a beautifully tense interaction on a Ferris wheel.
Don't be so gloomy. After all, it's not that awful. Well, what the fella said. In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace. And what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. So long, Howard.
Wells has claimed that he came up with that bit of dialogue himself. Critics have tried to make the case that he also had a hand in directing some of his scenes as well, but Wells and other members of the production have debunked this. Watching Reed's other films, we can clearly see that the man knew what he was doing. Orson Welles is not the only perfect bit of casting in this movie either. So many small parts stand out, like the little boy with the ball, or the porter at the apartment, who actually had to learn all of his lines phonetically. He couldn't speak a word of English.
I saw nothing, I said nothing. It's not my business.
We'll make it your business.
When the right face meets the right part, it's magic in cinema. Joseph Cotten, who had worked with Wells before on Citizen Kane, stumbles through the movie in an effortless daze. He's like a blank slate, blindly falling down a rabbit hole that is way bigger than what he could have imagined. It's a testament to everyone involved, Green, Reed, Cotten, that they were able to pull off such a bumbling protagonist.
That sounds like a cheap novelette.
Movies like this, where everything seems to come together into a single cohesive work, are rare. A similar case could be made for Casablanca, which came out a few years earlier and which nobody knew was going to become the classic that it is. Personally, I'm a bigger fan of The Third Man. I find its harsh realities more truthful than the wartime optimism of the other. But when you're putting two great films next to each other, you might as well just count yourself lucky to have seen any great film at all. It's amazing how fragile filmmaking can be. One choice can change a movie and its reputation completely. Maybe the most important choice comes at the end. Originally, the film's ending was going to be a happy one. Green had written that Alida Valli's character walks away with Holly Martin's hand in hand, but both Reed and Selznick agreed to disagree. They thought it should end on a more tragic note. I think they were right. Green himself admits it. It's one of the greatest final shots of all time. I remember when I first saw it, it hit me like a delayed punch to the gut. Because of how fast the rest of the film moves, all the emotional buildup just came rushing at me in those last few minutes. Reed was worried that the shot might have been too long, but its deliberate stillness is what makes it such a powerful anchor to all that came before. It's a bold move, but if there's one thing we can learn from Harry Lime and his famous speech, it's that boldness lasts.